Welcome back to the BotPod and episode 10 as part of our Tech Talk series with Lawrence Harvey. Today, I'm joined by Rory Daniels, the Head of Emerging Technology and Innovation at techUK. So, the reason we're here is techUK has just released its first dedicated robotics report, all about seizing the robotics opportunity, really looking at how the UK can build, deploy, scale, and export the next wave of robotics tech. So, we're really here to unpack what's in the report, where the UK stands on a global scale, how we can seize this opportunity, and what we really need to make happen next. And for me, I think it's a really interesting part that this isn't just the future of robotics as a conversation. It's very explicitly a what can we as the UK actually do next as a conversation. So, Rory, I'm really excited to have you on this pod. How are you today, and how's your week going?
It's been a busy one, not gonna lie, but been looking forward to this for quite a while now. So yeah, want to get stuck in.
Really glad to have you on the pod. And look, before we kind of get into the report, I'd love you to kind of, give everyone a bit of an introduction on yourself, your role at Tech UK, and I guess what brought you into robotics and emerging tech to start off with.
Yeah, sure. So I lead on emerging tech and innovation for Tech UK. Tech UK is essentially the voice of tech companies in the UK, the trade association for the tech sector. Lots of technologies within my remit: robotics, quantum, AI, space tech, semiconductors, and I work with the UK's most innovative tech companies to convene the sector, to showcase best practice, and to shape government's thinking about policy, strategy, regulation, all that sort of thing. So lots of really interesting, exciting, fast-moving technologies, and robotics is for me one of the big ones in the, and we'll get onto this, I'm sure, in the discussion, but the UK's got a really great early lead. And if we double down on it, on the innovation and the adoption, and get it right, then the potential rewards are absolutely huge for productivity, for jobs, for economic growth, and will transform sectors across the UK. So that's why we've gone all in, and robotics is a huge focus for us now at Tech UK.
And that's something we've always really aligned on is that I view what I do as like in the robotics recruitment space is changing the future of how we work and like how the future economy is going to look for not just us, but our future generations. And I think that makes me want to start really broadly because you touch on so many topics that I know we're going to like really rip apart today. And as you said, like you see like these big investments or deployments or like government announcements, it feels like we're kind of like having our little bit of a moment where I've followed the DAC and US space. It's been scaling massively, having these like, unicorn investments. And we seem to be a little bit on maybe the back burner with some of that. But what do you see has changed in the last few years? It's made robotics such a focus for not just you, but Tech UK as a business.
Firstly, I just completely agree. I think there's a real buzz in the sector that for a long time things have been kind of ticking along, and the rates of industrial robotic adoption, for instance, in our factories and warehouses, logistics centers, ticked up by a few percentage points each year. But the last few years, things have really exploded. And there's, as you say, lots of money flowing around and lots of innovations coming online pretty quickly. So really, really exciting time. UK is definitely having a moment. I think there are a few factors at play. One is definitely the technology itself. So if you compare the robot of today to the robot of 10 or 20 years ago, fundamentally different. They're largely and increasingly autonomous. They can perform a wide range of tasks. They can sense and perceive and act within their own environment. They act in real time, and they're in loads more sectors, industries, businesses than they ever were. So the technology itself really quite different. Things like sensors and batteries and other technologies have been miniaturized. The cost has fallen drastically. And so that's what's leading to the spread of robotics and becoming increasingly ubiquitous. But I'd also say there's a real political moment in the UK, and government, I think, get that there is an opportunity that the UK can seize in the robotic space to tackle some of our biggest challenges as an economy and as a society. We as Tech UK would like to see them go further, and we keep kind of pushing for that and trying to make it tangible for government. But some really promising signs that we can talk about. We're seeing from government some money, some commitments. Yeah, promising stuff.
Definitely. I think, as you kind of mentioned, it's not just having new technologies in one remit, it's aligning and kind of linking all those up from, cheaper hardware purchasing or more freely available purchasing of like actuators and gears and things like that, people mass producing them, like, Scheffler partnerships and things like that. And I think it's that weird split of labor, productivity, economic growth all linking into these. So I guess with you and what you've been building and really focused on across not just robotics, but the entire like emerging tech ecosystem, why is it now that's the right time for this report? Why not last year or 2 years ago when autonomous driving was becoming this like big boom and we were seeing what was coming out in the UK? Why now have you gone, hey, this is what we need to put together?
Yeah, so I mean, speaking personally, don't get me wrong, if I was in government 3 years ago, I would have pushed for robotics 3 years ago because the opportunity's been sitting there for a little while. It's not like it's just popped up, but certainly in the last few years, and autonomous vehicles is a really good example of how the not just the technology, but the business model and the real world deployment have come a long way in a short space of time. So techUK has Wave and Waymo and Oxa and Uber, etc., all in our membership. And you take Waymo as an example. Waymo and Wave, I see them driving around London right now, gearing up for their first commercial deployment in the UK. Waymo are in the US in a number of cities. They're in Tokyo and they're in London. And so, they're already driving millions of miles on roads, hundreds of millions of miles or tens of millions of miles in simulation. It's happening. Many paying customers, etc. So that's, I think, what's really changed in the last few years is you've gone from the promise and small scale deployments and pilots to increasingly large scale deployments in numerous cities across the world. And London is really a hub for this, and the UK should make the most of the fact that on related technologies as well, including or particularly AI, we've got such a lead that we need to kind of apply that to the robotics sector, double down on deployment and scale.
I think it's really interesting you say about the UK, London being a leader there as well, because I think about it and I think a lot of the Londoners or being in the city every day, I think there's this, really high level of risk aversion. But then you step back, you go to Milton Keynes when we're at, the events down there, and it's a really big hub for adoption where it's way more widely accepted with starships already over there, Capra Robotics being built, like doing test deployments out there and field stuff. So it's really interesting to see that as well. And I think, as you mentioned, like the UK's really got its strengths. You've got the research, the AI capability. We've got the kind of ideas, some really awesome like minds coming out of like the National Robotarium in Edinburgh and these super early stage like either YC or like research startups from students. But as you said, like the deployment pieces, and it's a conversation I have so often that there's this gap when it comes to commercialization and deployment. You talk about Waymo and what they're doing in the US, way further ahead than where we're at with, look, you see them driving on roads for data collection right now, but we're not actually there at the deployment. So, or like anyone at, the Innovate UK event in March, they would have, with us, it would have had these types of conversations. So you say we're like in a really, I guess, good position, or London's in a leading position, but like, how would you really characterize that when we are comparing ourselves to the Waymos, the, agilities and figures out in the States, these massive Chinese manufacturers as well? Like how would you characterize where we're at in terms of like where we're actually strong and where we're consistently underperforming? Because I see so much of this as a risk and adoption piece.
Yeah, sure. It's a good point. I think we are increasingly realizing in the UK that we have to play to our strengths and that comparative advantage matters. And I think we see that through recent changes to UKRI on the way they're structuring the organization and their research council, their councils, and allocating grants and that sort of thing. It's far more what is the tangible kind of impact that the UK is best placed to deliver, and then the other stuff that perhaps we're not going to be leading on. We're happy to collaborate internationally or what have you. So I think we're starting to see that recognition really play out in terms of the realities of the sector. And I think scale is a really important factor here. So the UK is never going to compete in certain technologies or applications with the likes of the US and China. For example, the UK specialism in robotics will largely be specialized robots, not general purpose robots. So think a drone that inspects a wind turbine, not a humanoid robot that will put away your washing and then walk your dog. So um, I think we realize that. I think the ecosystem largely reflects that. But we don't have the scale of funding that the US or China have, and so that kind of that does restrict us a little. That being said, within Europe, the UK is certainly a leader in robotics adoption, and you mentioned appetite for risk. Well, the UK is the startup hub of Europe, and there's very few things riskier than starting a business, particularly in a fast-moving technology. So I think the UK's got a lot of the right ingredients, and we at techUK increasingly setting out a kind of telling a bit of a story and setting out a bit of a roadmap for the UK to turn these often disparate, unconnected strengths into basically an engine for technology adoption and ultimately for growth.
I think it's interesting the way you kind of phrase it, because now I'm thinking of it as like we have like a realization problem of like people coming out of amazing unis, great AI, dexterous manipulation, perception, talent, simulation, whatever it may need to be. Then it goes, hold on, we really need to be building autonomous forklifts for the farmers, berry pickers for agriculture, more so than a bipedal robot that's going to be hoovering a house in 6 years and making your bed. Um, like, do you think that's a case where, as the UK, if we are refocused on these more specialized robotics as our growth piece or where we'd find most successes, do you think there's a big risk in the talent piece where people who are coming out of universities in really niche arenas, but for more general robots, going to go, hey, well, we don't have our careers in the UK or we can't build that. And then it's going to affect the talent pool moving forwards because these amazing people that we've put through awesome universities and courses aren't going to have the career opportunities in the UK because of that? Or is it we need to then go, no, don't leave the UK, but this is why this specialized robot is better than your general purpose humanoid? Like, how do we bring that into the ecosystem without fragmenting who we are and where we see ourselves going as a country?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I say is that it's not that we're not doing general purpose
No,
robotics. There are a handful of companies in the UK that do. I mean, humanoid. The
quite literally a
humanoid
handful.
company is yes, yeah, literally. Is the classic example, I think, of probably the UK's leading humanoid company. But there are others, and I think you know, generally speaking, if you built a robot that did a set number of tasks, or you built one that did a much wider set of tasks, a lot of the tech behind it, a lot of the engineering skills is largely the same. I mean, you could build a narrow purpose humanoid robot, or you could build a general purpose one, but a humanoid robot's a humanoid robot. So for me, the question is, where does the UK lead within the tech stack? And typically we've gravitated towards and increasingly towards software. Um, but other countries are increasingly looking towards hardware and supply chains and critical minerals, and where do you get the actuator from, and how do you source the minerals for the battery, and how do you assemble these components into a system that works, and then how do you capture value through that process? And the UK can't just be the brain for every robot.
Yeah.
So I think that's the conversation we need to have, and I don't think we're there yet as a country, and we're not thinking in that level of detail. And I think you need that to be strategic in your investments and your decisions.
I feel like your work being a lot of research conversations with policymakers, stakeholders, government officials. Like, if you were to say, like, for us to be in a sweet spot, let's like pick up uh, a concept or a style of working or building from another country, and let's cut out like South Korea and China. What would you choose?
If we could adopt a way
It,
of doing robotics from a different country, is that what you're
yeah,
asking?
or like and who we could be like, who we should be like learning from. If you go, oh, that country is, X, Y, and Z in terms of their robotics adoption or how they've industrialized at scale. If we could do that, we'd be flying.
Mm. So maybe a bit of a counterintuitive answer, but I think actually it's the countries that treat robotics least as a novelty or even as a category in its own right. I mean, it's just for many businesses in many countries, it's kind of the natural evolution of, production processes, for example, that you become increasingly automated, and that robotics adoption is seen not as a novelty, but as um, something that will boost productivity and therefore should be seriously considered. And so I point to Denmark actually as an example of there's a very good report that I recommend reading from the Manufacturing Technology Center, the
Hmm.
MTC, on global robotics clusters. And they go to, I think it's 7 or 8 across the world, and say what makes this cluster successful and look at historical, institutional, social factors. And Denmark is one of those clusters, and it's really, I think the example of food packaging is mentioned or is kind of deep dived into, and it's that the yeah, it's the least glamorous sectors, I guess, that have embraced robotics adoption and have become a lot more productive as a result. And ultimately, a country with a strong manufacturing base or strong base of automation across manufacturing, logistics, transport, etc., has a really strong foundation upon which to build further adoption in maybe industries that are slightly more challenging in terms of their potential use cases. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that the UK hasn't realized yet, and it's in those sectors that haven't seen real productivity gains for decades. But the adoption of robotics and automation requires quite significant upfront costs, and so often capex costs. So I think that's often where government can help de-risk, hold the hand of industries like that, and let's not go after the sexy stuff all the time. You mentioned fruit picking. It's a really good example. The Speaking to someone a few months ago, they said if you actually look at the data as to where the most value can be gained from applying a robot to the fruit picking process, it's actually in cutting the grass under the fruit plants. It's not in picking the fruit itself, because that's an incredibly challenging job to achieve the level of dexterity required in a robotic hand to pick a strawberry and use computer vision to gauge the perfect time at which that strawberry is ripe. But actually, most of the human hours in the process go into trimming the grass under the fruit to allow it to grow most effectively. So we quite literally need to, go after the low-hanging fruit, if you will, and cut the grass, not pinch the
Pardon the
strawberry.
pun.
You pardon the pun, very intentional.
Also really interesting you mentioned the MTC cluster report because I actually had a good read through it after the event 2 weeks ago. And it's interesting you mentioned, food and beverage manufacturing, but then it also links into, yeah, the pre-process of that being the ag tech space. And it's, you see deployments or demos everywhere of, oh, this is how we cut something off a vine. But, actually it's a bit more granular than that. Like take it a step back. And I mean, like, as you said as well, like, well, two things, I guess. One is in terms of bottlenecks, would you call like cost just like our biggest bottleneck right now with like the cost of purchasing certain levels of hardware and actually getting the investment because investment in hardware is so much harder than software?
Yeah, so if you're talking about adoption, I think increasingly not. I think the cost of purchasing a robot is declining rapidly. I mean, you can quite literally now log on to a site like, an online marketplace. You can buy a robot in a box. You can have it delivered the next day to your factory, and in a number of hours you can set it up. I'm not saying this is, this is not the perfect solution. You want to spend a bit of time probably working with engineers getting it right, but the principle is that the hardware has declined in cost so drastically that these are becoming increasingly commercial products, off the shelf products. So increasingly, no, I wouldn't say that's the issue. I would say perceptions is still a major barrier in that people perceive robotics to be complicated. It's increasingly not the case, and requires special expertise to install and to use a robot to operate it. increasingly not the case. The rise of large language models, for instance, natural language processing means you can literally talk to a robot nowadays and it can talk back to you. I mean, you don't need to learn Python. So things are changing quite quickly, and it's the businesses that adopt a robot for, think of the most automatable task in your business, the easiest, the most low hanging of fruit, that it's literally on the floor, and then adopt a robot for that. Start there, learn from it, and scale. And it's often, I think, the businesses that go big too fast, that adopt poorly, are put off from future adoptions, and then their appetite for risk is too low as a result.
And it's trying to solve too many problems at once sometimes. Where as much as we no one really wants like a cobot anymore, they want something that is more specialized but can do multiple tasks because that makes it more cost effective and improves the ROI. It's that really, I guess, weird middle ground. And it's I think a lot of this as well will come across to the UK's approach to training, but the education and like what's really pushed through because I think there needs to be a lot more in terms of like the partnerships with um, universities and getting people a bit more into the real world. And I think it can be hard in an ecosystem like ours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some really interesting companies actually looking to tackle this. So one in techUK's membership is called Kwanzaa, and they basically they bring robots. You have a robot and you have a digital twin of the robot. And often the challenge in universities is that big, expensive, multi-million pound robot that the university bought that they're really happy about lives in the basement, and maybe a third year student, if they're lucky, gets to, give it a command the day before they leave. So that's kind of been the traditional model of robotics in universities. And this sort of model where you day one of your course in your first year, you log in, you see the digital twin of the robot, you mess around with it all you like, you see that play out in the physical robot, and vice versa. And you can get a cheap physical robot, you can alter it, do whatever you like to it, and then see how it plays out in simulation. And it's using technologies, combining technologies to break down the barriers to education and training and learning as quickly as possible, and to get people thinking in systems as well, because that is ultimately what the UK's robotics adoption at scale will look like. It is not isolated robots and use cases and deployments. It is an ecosystem of capabilities. And so we're already seeing examples where companies like Kwanzaa are coming in and disrupting the education space and accelerating the time to development and to adoption for UK students, businesses.
Okay, that's really interesting. I love that. Um, and I think something that if I track back a little bit, you said there's people who talk about humanoids and these sci-fi use cases, but like let's be in reality, the adoption is much more grounded. We're talking about the unsexier industries that we're trying to revolutionize. And I appreciate you talk about Denmark and food manufacturing and things like that. But in the UK, what would you say is like our nearest real near-term opportunity? Is it more like the warehousing and logistics side, like very much picker packers? Are we talking, we're going to be the surgical robot innovators? Are we talking grass cutting below the berries, not actually the berries? Like where would you see it?
Yeah, so I think it comes back to what we said at the start, in that whenever you're thinking about how do we deploy these technologies at scale in our country, it has to come back to the big challenges that you're facing as a country. Like, it always comes back to the people that will benefit from, will use the technology, and the society in which this technology operates and is deployed. So in the UK, I think, a few examples that come to mind. Energy is a really big sector in the UK. The North Sea, we've got the world's largest offshore wind turbine farm. I think they're called farms. Those need to be inspected. And surprise, surprise, the use of drones is quite prolific in those wind farms. The other that I give is nuclear. So the UK has quite a strong nuclear industry. Sites like Sellafield have been deploying robotic dogs and drones in particular for a number of years, to mainly for inspection. So it's often, to use the cliche, it's the dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks where the case to be made for the adopting a robot and is highest because is greatest because ultimately it's human lives and safety on the line. So the UK's got lots of those sectors, and the UK is leading in lots of them as well. So the opportunity for us is to double down in those. It's to work with organizations like a few weeks ago, I was at a roundtable, and National Grid were around the table and their venture arm. And they were talking about the fact that they invest in hundreds of companies and startups, really innovative ones that they invest in and they bring into National Grid and deploy across their sites to speed up all sorts of things around energy infrastructure building and maintenance and inspection, all that sort of stuff. And it's we need to be doing a lot more of that as a country. And the NHS is the other big one. So we speak to companies and the companies in membership that do everything from drone deliveries of blood samples between NHS hospitals. Right today, you can go walk outside central London and see them flying between Guy's and St. Thomas. Been doing that for a number of years now. The NHS's 10-year plan recently committed to robotics as one of its frontier technologies. I think it wants all surgeries of a particular type to be done by robots by, I think it's 2035 or 2040. So quite ambitious targets.
Very.
And one of the two leading surgical robotics companies in the world is British. So play to our strengths, solve our biggest challenges, and roll out robotics where it makes most sense to do so as quickly as possible. Learn from it, scale, go from there.
I love that. And I actually completely forgot, didn't even think about inspection when I was giving you a list there. So that's a really good point. And I mean, we're quite okay with this. We see the benefits. We see this happening. We notice the drone in the air because we know what it's doing. But what would you say is like a general weakness is maybe people who aren't as plugged in as we are? What would you say is the most like underappreciated or underthought about when people are looking at entering this robotics ecosystem in the UK? Would you say it is maybe something a bit more niche, like inspection of wind turbines? What would you say is, yeah, the most underappreciated?
So I think it depends how you define a robot. At techUK, we define them very broadly from autonomous vehicles, driverless vehicles to drones to robots in health or what have you. So they're going to be a little provocative, but I think the washing machine in your kitchen is a good example of a technology that no one would really call a robot and has been around for many years to the point where we take it for granted. I have a washing machine, and yeah, I still wash the dishes by hand. I don't know why, but maybe I don't trust it. Something in that maybe, but
I
it
hope
for
you're not
me.
putting your dishes in a washing machine, but
Sorry, dishwasher. Yeah, that's probably yeah. That would be a bit disastrous, maybe. Unless they're very strong dishes. So yeah, it's those simple technologies that we probably take for granted, but that get the job done. And you know, the first time I rode in a driverless car in a Waymo, I thought, oh my, this is amazing. This is, potentially transformative. I thought, what an experience. Loved every second of it. The second time, I thought, yeah, this is still a pretty cool experience. Third time, you think, okay, I'm going to be late for where I'm getting to. I hope it gets me there. And your priorities quickly change, right? And I think the abnormal becomes normal fairly quickly for most people, and the novelty wears off. So in the robotic space, I would love to see a situation in which robotics becomes normalized. Starship is a really good example. So the little delivery robots, pavement delivery robots you see trundling around Milton Keynes and Leeds and other cities across the UK, campuses and university campuses in the US. A few years, when they were first deployed, I think a lot of residents didn't know what to think. They thought, why is this trundling along the pavement? I don't want my city to be overrun by them. I don't necessarily trust it. Where does it come from? But then you go back, to these cities today, people very happily coexist alongside these robots. And in fact, there was a survey done in Cambridgeshire, I think quite recently, something like 93% of residents said that they liked their pavement delivery robot. They had a positive experience with one. And just goes to show that the abnormal becomes normal. And um, I think we need a bit more of that in the UK. And I get that adopting these technologies can be quite we're stepping into the unknown in many ways, as we always do when we adopt new technologies. But it's our job, I think, to tell a story about why we should give it a go and see for ourselves. And we should have an honest conversation about the challenges behind these technologies as well. And so I think just last week, we published a piece in City AM about pavement delivery robots, and I was arguing that there are accessibility concerns, which was kind of the national debate that was happening last week about do we want loads of these things on the pavement? But there are also real opportunities about serving people that maybe can't leave the home to get food or medicine delivered, about bringing back jobs to the high street because suddenly businesses can deliver further, about cutting down on carbon intensive last mile deliveries, that sort of thing. So there's an honest conversation I think that we need to be having as the UK, but we shouldn't shy away from or reject adopting technologies just because it feels uncertain. I don't
Mm.
think that's the right approach.
And I feel like the more it's normalized, like you said, like a car becomes, I need to get there on time, not, oh, watch the steering wheel move by itself. A
Mm.
delivery robot gets a little bit anthropomorphized when they've got names like pasted on the top with the little blinking eyes, or even it's the small things you reference like washing machines and dishwashers. I remember when Tesco's first went from manual checkout, they brought in self-service. Everyone was like, "Oh my God, the world's going to end." Then now you're walking around Tesco's and there's a nice cleaning robot going around, or you're at the airport in Heathrow and there's a large industrial robotic Hoover. Like just people getting more used to it, where they go, "Oh, that's cool," and a few flights down, it's just so normalized. And I think it's really interesting, like the waves we see it come in. So, you go from washing machine exists to self-checkout exists to like, oh my God, humanoid robots are real. So like what, and yeah, we talk about this, like the ways we're saying the UK is having its moment right now. But like what would you say is materially different about this little phase or like new robotics bubble we're in compared to those previous cycles? Is it just that AI and technologies have improved so much more that we can do so much with it? Is it people are just more willing to innovate and adopt something different?
Yeah, so I think a bit cliched, but I think AI is one of the real game changers here. It is the fact that a few decades ago, robots were largely constrained to predictable, um, structured environments like manufacturing facilities. Think that giant robotic arm that takes the same car part and puts it in the same place time and time again, highly repeatable. Um, that's no longer the environment to which robots are constrained. And as we just said, you will see them increasingly trundling down your pavement. You will be in them driving down the road. You will receive a surgical procedure through a robot, either controlled by a surgeon or operated autonomously. So that's the new reality, I think. And the lots of these capabilities have been enabled by AI, in particular the likes of computer vision. So AI being able to see the world around it. Obviously, that means the robot can leave the factory and not bump into X or Y, can navigate its environment, but lots of other AI technologies as well. So be that sensing, or just the raw compute, the brain of the robot that is increasingly um, um, these technologies are increasingly computing on the device itself at the edge. They don't need to communicate with a data center, and that opens up a whole new range of possibilities as well. So I think AI is the really big one, and as I said at the start, it's a combination of dozens of others that have plummeted in cost. For example, the LiDAR, the sensor that scans, I think it's 100 meters in every direction, that sits on top of a Waymo self-driving vehicle, and a number of other self-driving vehicles use LiDAR. Other sensors are available that has its perks. The cost of a LiDAR has decreased, I think, by around 99% in the last 10 to 15 years. And so you can imagine that's an absolute game changer, not just for driverless vehicles, but you could stick a LiDAR on so many things that would allow them to be increasingly autonomous. So yeah, it's a bit of a technological renaissance, I would say, in the robotics space, and the UK's definitely got an opportunity to lead on developing, but also adopting these technologies.
And it's, definitely so much not just a cost piece, but, people can now use LiDARs and cameras integrated into one system, which, changed the game for depth perception and heat mapping and all of those, especially in inspection environments for hazardous materials or whatever. And I think we speak so much technically because we do get really excited about these like buzzword innovation changes and things that the robot can do that couldn't do before. But there's a really large part of the report that is on this policy side. Like, the government has a really clear role to play here. And I think it's where we kind of make this a really practical conversation than like, wow, look what we could do or look where we could be. And so much of it is, recognizing robotics as this future frontier technology. But like, what do you think like changes when robotics gets treated strategically critical rather than just innovative tech?
Yeah, so I think that's the moment at which we move to the next level in all of this. So the UK's got great capabilities as it is, but to be frank, the we welcome the investment and the announcements, particularly in the industrial strategy when it came out a number of months ago, about a year ago now, around robotics. Great, and the biggest thing to come out of it, well, one of the biggest things was the a 40 million pound robotic adoption hub network of physical hubs located across the country that will help businesses in those regions adopt robotics. Brilliant. However, the the scale of the opportunity before us is, quite frankly, more than a 40 million pound opportunity. If we're talking about just AI plus robotics, and there are many other strands to this conversation. Robotics or physical AI, I'm sure we can talk about that in a bit, is in many ways the living embodiment of artificial intelligence. It's AI not behind a screen, but in the world around us. And that opens up so many possibilities for it to completely transform and enhance the way we live our lives. And we need to be grasping that with a bit more than 40 million pounds. And so we in our robotics reports call for a number of things that will, I think, raise the game and put us more on par with other countries that not just realize the opportunity and say they realize the opportunity, but back it with significant investment and support. So that's what we're keen to see is the UK move to the next level and double down on the opportunity we have.
I guess that pushes into, this like opportunities action plan that is in the recommendations of the report too. Like, so if you were to like, how would you like quantify success by this in the plan? Is it oh, okay, we've got the 40 million investment. It's actually showing the proof of here's what's going into it and here's what's coming out of it for the next 10-year plan, or like what would this action plan like focus on first? Is it just the increase of knowledge and opportunity, or is it, hey, we need this level of investment in X many startups to show we're successful here?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely to be worked through. But in short, what we want is a tangible plan for delivery that includes a number of commitments across a wide range of, from skills to finance and investment to infrastructure, that the UK can begin moving at pace to deliver government in collaboration with industry. It's why we didn't call for a national strategy, because we don't want, with the greatest respect of government, having been a civil servant myself, we don't want to spend the next 1, 2, 3 years thinking about a strategy and then the next few after that looking to implement it. We have the opportunity is here to seize. It's why our report is called Seizing the Robotic Opportunity. And that's why a tangible, deliverable action plan that we can get going from day one is what we're calling for. Others are also calling for exactly this. The NTC is a really good example. And it's why the Robotics Advisory Group, which is a group of external experts that the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology convened about 6 months ago. The term will last for 3 years, and the group will meet quarterly, and it will advise government and ministers on the UK's robotics strategy and where we should be heading. We as techUK and myself are very, very excited to be on that group, and so are 5 or 6 of our members, which is great. And we agreed in the first meeting of the Robotics Advisory Group that the output of the group will be this strategy slash action plan, something tangible, deliverable that sets the course for where the UK is going, but crucially, how we're going to get there. So that's what we need. We're working very closely with government and our members to make that happen as soon as possible. But almost all comparable countries have a clear plan for where they're going in robotics, and that's something at present we lack.
And that's, really interesting how much you touched on government, because Russia, they can act as such major early customers if we're talking defense, healthcare, energy. And yeah, that point you make about using public procurement like more strategically. And why do you think it is, I guess, I don't know if underused is the right word, but how do we increase this like procurement early demand in more of a public space? Like how would we change that?
So yeah, I think it is underused. I think the UK government spends, I think it's £300 billion a year on procurement. So obviously that's buying everything from paper clips for schools to operating tables for the NHS. And you're right, I don't think we're strategic enough about it. I think there are certain things so defense procurement is a good example of, I believe in contracts for a number of years now, there's been a stipulation that there's a certain, what's the word? Basically, anyone looking to procure a service or a good or a service through the system must consider SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, to a certain extent, because you don't just want a sector of the big ones, of the primes. So, and I think that's been quite successful in defence. And so often you find SMEs grouping together and bidding for something with a prime, for example. So it leads to a kind of healthier sector overall. So there are instances in which we're using procurement strategically. But in robotics specifically, I think there's very little or virtually nothing. And the thing I would flag is that the government has done a brilliant thing recently, the last few years, which is the Procurement Act that was, I think, came into force very recently, that made quite a crucial change to procurement that said that any government department, organization, agency procuring should not consider, originally it was the most economically viable option. So cost was king. I believe the word economically has been removed. And so what that means is now the criteria for which you can consider procuring something has just become almost infinite. So if we can make the case as a sector for robotics, tangibly tackling the social care crisis in the NHS, or equipping our armed forces with the capabilities we need to face the new kind of warfare that we're beginning to see or have seen through Ukraine, then we need to make that case in these procurement bids. And the Procurement Act has basically set the environment in which we can do that. So there are real opportunities here to take, but and another is that I believe that now each government department has a procurement champion who can share best practice around these sorts of things through the department. So what we need is government to take an all the government approach to robotics and then filter that through the procurement process so that some of that 300 billion can be unlocked for genuinely strategically important initiatives that depend upon adopting robots.
That's really interesting. I think, and then if we, kind of keep that idea of adopting robots, there's that emphasis and the report in storytelling. And you'll either hear by, founders and people who are doing demos, especially if you go to these like massive trade shows like Automatic, Machina, Humanoid Summit, and it's, how people talk about robotics, not just talking about robotics, and public perception. I think, you can flip-flop between, wow, this is so cool and really like innovative, to the real fears that you mentioned of like, well, do I want a robot on my pavement? Or like, what if there's someone um who's in less able or in a wheelchair or can't get around them, like, how do you introduce and change that? And this narrative around it is like crucial to get right, because if not, you'll have people defacing robots, spray painting it, kicking it to the curb. You've seen, people beat up a humanoid on YouTube, and like, we don't want that for the future of what this industry should be. So do you think we're like focused on like the replacement of like technology and introducing something new, rather than like the augmentation of how we're going to like really bring something in, like stabilize it across the community and the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's a gap in the UK's robotics adoption landscape. I think the social attitudes, cultural attitudes, cannot be neglected. And I often say that, we're talking about the meaty things, if you were, of do we have the right people in the right roles? Do we have the right levels of investment for our companies? Do we have the right infrastructure, so that robots can recharge and they can be built and they can, whatever. Um, and I can imagine a scenario in which we, bit by bit, tackle and solve all of these challenges. And we're producing amazing robots. We've got world-leading companies, across every sector. And then no one wants them. And not just no one wants them, but people are actively opposed to them. And that is the final chunk of the puzzle. And if we don't get that right, and if we don't start working on that now, then we're almost, we're doomed to fail. So the UK, ironically, is home to amazing storytellers. We've been telling stories for so long and been really good at kind of exporting them. You go anywhere in the world and you'll talk about Harry Potter, or Star Wars was filmed in the UK, or you name it. We've told that story, and now we need to do the same for robots. And they are not this, they're not always how they're portrayed in sci-fi. That is one narrow depiction of the technology. But I'd love to see more stories about how they're transforming, the patient experience in hospitals, or how they're helping families care for their elderly relatives, when the alternative is you stick them in a care home and you see them once a week. I mean, there are real, tangible, human lived experiences that we should be talking about, because, and again, it comes back to they will solve some of our biggest challenges as a society. And wherever possible, we need to be having that nuanced, honest conversation about what these technologies will do for us.
100%. And I think, as you kind of mentioned that, like, so we have great storytellers, right? It's not that we as a country don't possess, but it's who is it that needs to get better at telling the story? Is it like industry leaders and founders? Is it the government needing to shout from the rooftops? Is it the media? Like, who is it that needs to tell this story better to change this for us?
So I think the short answer is everyone,
Thought you were going
because
to say that, to be fair.
yeah, so, sorry, really insightful podcast guest. I think because I don't see that story being told at all, really, in the UK. So everyone has a role to play. Um, in universities, it's about how is this research with this really wordy academic 10,000, 20,000 word paper, how does that translate into real improvements for real people's lives? For the companies developing the technologies, it's not just I'm going to build a robot and I'm going to stick it on the pavement and let's see how it does, but it's saying, in the City AM piece I mentioned recently, there was speaking to a number of our pavement delivery robot companies in membership, around that time, and they were talking about things like, you know, there's a perception that the robot is taking up space on the pavement. There were critiques made that people are not leaving their homes because there's no space for them to walk around the streets, and I think I don't know quite how true that is. But then I speak to the companies actually developing these technologies, and completely independently of any regulation, they're doing amazing things on accessibility. So they're working with charities for people who are blind and partially sighted to make sure that the robots are as visible as possible, so that the little red flag you see on top of a Starship robot has been developed directly in collaboration with one of these charities. They work with guide dog charities to make sure that the technology is deployed responsibly alongside guide dogs. They share their data with apps that map the built environment for people who are partially sighted, so that they have real-time data about, this road is closed or there's an obstruction here. So they're doing amazing stuff, and we need to be building upon that, shouting about it. Sure, put some of it in regulation and kind of embed it for the rest of the sector. But there are the companies that are pioneering the deployment are leading the charge when it comes to safety and accessibility. And the approach of there are isolated incidents in which people supposedly are not happy, shut it all down, move these companies from the UK. They don't deserve to be. That is wrong. And it comes back to having that honest, open conversation as a country about where this technology is going and the story we want to tell. And I think that has to come from all of us.
Very good point. I mean, look, I agree with you on it being everyone. Like, it can't just be, pushed from one angle, because then, especially if it's just a government angle, we're never going to adopt it, or it's just a media angle, someone's going to have a problem with the media. So I do agree. And I think it's, bringing some of those like real world tried and tested stories to light, because that's the only real way that it's not going to, someone's pushing an agenda until, the real lived experiences can be shown. Um, I think maybe the interesting thing about our conversations is that we see things from a very different different side of the coin, where I spend my time like swimming in the robotics talent market, not just in the UK, but also across Europe. And there's this, consistent like challenge, but like growth piece of the robotics being so interdisciplinary. Like, no one is just a roboticist. You're an AI researcher, you're a systems level engineer, you do control, simulation, safety, you kind of do the lot. And it's not just, oh, I work in a startup, I wear loads of hats. It's in this industry, you just simply have to. So like with that, I know we've mentioned that we're really good at software, right? What talent gaps do you think we have, or that you're seeing that concern you the most, that are going to halter our either growth or adoption in this space over the next like 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, so I think there are a few. One is in just raw engineering talent. So I think I saw a stat recently that said that the UK was the lowest of 19 or 16 comparable countries when it came to the number of engineering graduates. Um, and that's a problem because robots are, as I said earlier, as much hardware as they are software. And even if we don't manufacture the components ourselves, we will increasingly assemble them in the UK. And good robot design, you can build a brain all you want, but it needs to be connected to a body, and you need to have at least some fundamental understanding of what that body is like. And it helps if you design it yourself and you design the whole system. So engineering is definitely the first thing. And I'd say the second is that systems thinking piece, and it comes back to the Kwanzaa example I gave earlier of we need a new generation of roboticists who are just as adept jumping on the software, jumping into the digital twin, doing a bit of coding, and then moving to the hardware itself, and fixing this or that, and then constantly iterating, but fluctuating between the two. And from touring a few weeks ago, I was at Imperial College London and touring their robotics labs, and you saw it firsthand. You saw that the bright engineering students were 1 minute they were tinkering with this on the robot, then they were doing this on the console, and it's a back and forth. And we can't be producing talent in silos because robots are systems, and we can't. It doesn't make sense to own just one small part of the tech stack. The opportunity is too big for that.
Mm.
So I'd say that's where the general trend I'm seeing, and I'm seeing that play out. In particular, I talk a lot to UCL, University College London, and I speak to a lot of people there who do a fairly new degree area or kind of academic discipline that was introduced a few years ago, robotics plus AI. So there are a lot of people there that do robotics plus AI, And it is about that interdisciplinary systems thinking that the UK needs a lot more of. And I see universities actually following suit, which is great. Um, but there's a lot more to do.
I think the implementation of that kind of business unit and course is really actually what's going to be the changing point for our future of the workforce. Because yeah, there's been computer engineering, and or you've done like physics and simulation modeling. It's lacked that integration with the AI, with the systems level thinking, with the integration of software and hardware at one go. And I think it's really good that there's this approach, but it's definitely coming in terms of rethinking robotics education. I think this needs to actually trickle down all the way to like primary school, secondary school level of like, bringing in um like Reachy Mini 2s or anything on education or old school, like not like a sort of shadow robot arm, but like something like that to get it in front of people in a different way. Because yeah, it's not so traditional anymore. You're not a mechanical engineer and a simulation engineer. You've got to do everything. It's all mechatronics and integration. So I think it's a really good piece. And I'm glad to see it's finally kind of coming to play a bit more in terms of having those courses specifically going, actually, we need to change how we're setting people up for success coming out of these amazing unis and amazing theses and projects they can actually implement in the real world and create change. Um, so if we like zoom this out, then this sounds like a really big opportunity for all of us, especially if we get this right. And the report mentions, I had a note here somewhere, about smart machines contributing to like over 150 billion in GVA over the next like 10 years. I mean, for us to get there and to hit this like 10-year milestone, what do you think really needs to happen in the next like 18, 24 months that's going to unlock this kind of like real of momentum? Is it a government thing? Is it a storytelling thing? Like what do you think it needs to be?
So yes, it is all of those things. So it's as I said before, it's definitely a government thing. So government need to uh, work with industry to put a plan in place, full of tangible deliverables that can be actioned as soon as possible. And that's the Robotics Opportunities Action Plan that we call for. It's definitely an industry thing in that we need to back the most promising robotic startups and scale-ups in the UK. Big challenge that we face is that, as I said, we are leading in Europe in terms of our startup ecosystem. But you look around and you don't see many of the kind of big robotics companies you'd expect to see based on the number of startups that we have. So you've got, Ocado Technology is a really good one. Dyson to a certain extent, although obviously a lot of their operations now not in the UK any longer. Wave, one of the world's leading autonomous vehicle companies, from right here in the UK. Oxa to maybe a bit more physical AI than robotics, but there are examples. There should be a lot more. So we need to be better at backing the most promising scale-ups. I think the UK's Sovereign AI, £500 million Sovereign AI fund is a really good place to start. And it's promising to see, bless you, the British Business Bank, National Wealth Fund, playing a much more active role in committing substantial sums of money to funds and to scale-ups in strategically important technologies, predominantly AI, but increasingly robotics as well. So we need to back the potential winners. And then I think there's probably a wider piece as it comes back to, yeah, society, public perceptions, and we need to use our amazing national institutions and cultural institutions, or everyone from the British Library to the Royal Shakespeare Company to the BBC, to tell this positive story, to put this issue on this opportunity on the radar of the general public, and to prepare our society for the technology, the kind of the wave of technology that is coming down the line. And other countries are a bit further ahead, but you can see what's coming. And it's the increasingly ubiquitous nature of robotics in many forms. And it's something, as I keep saying, we should not shy away from. We need to prepare for. So quite a lot that needs to happen, and we set all of it out in the report. So we definitely recommend reading it in a bit of detail and also following what we get up to in our robotics program.
100%. I think all listeners and watchers from this podcast will definitely, if they haven't already read it, they will be going to find it. I'm sure asking one of us for a link after. Um, I think we talk about it's like perception piece of how people actually view robotics in this ecosystem and like where the UK is compared to where we can be as players. What would you say is like a key like misconception people still have about the UK robotics scene?
Good question. I think that maybe that it's a lot smaller than it actually is. And I think this comes back to the fact that we've got lots of kind of disparate capabilities, but we're not particularly good at joining them all up. And it's something that tech is a real focus of techUK's. In that often, to see that nuclear robot on the Sellafield site, as I said, for inspection or decommissioning, unless you've driven down to the nuclear site, they've somehow let you in and you've gone on the floor with the robot, which would be probably quite dangerous. I don't really know how you're going to find out that we're doing amazing things in that area of robotics. There is no trade association for the robotics sector in the UK, so there's no voice of industry. That's not techUK. It's partly why we moved into that space is we thought that the sector needs a cheerleader and a champion, and particularly the companies developing these technologies. So that is now very firmly techUK. But yeah, I think it's the lack of coordination, the lack of join up, the lack of a national voice until now, that has meant that we've been quietly deploying robotics in specific use cases where it makes sense to do so in seemingly random parts of the UK, and we've never told the kind of national story. And it's something that in one of our recommendations in the report, we call for DSIT's, Department of Science, Innovation, Technologies team in robotics, to be doubled in size. And we're really, really happy to see that is happening. And they are hiring another 3 or 4 people, which will more than double the size of the team. So that's what we want, because we want government to have the capability to be able to join up the ecosystem and to help us tell that story.
I love that. And us, yeah, I love hearing about kind of the work you guys do behind the scenes and how you're really trying to change the future of not just work, but robotics as whole emerging technology scene to continue putting us on the map and us creeping up on those leader tables. And I think, for everyone listening, not only have they got a really good insight into where we're at and the future plans and, now maybe also going to have a look through the report, but for you specifically, what could you talk about, or what would you maybe like the listeners to know more in terms of what you're doing for people who may not already know about not just techUK, but the whole emerging tech and innovation group?
Yeah, so as I said at the start, our emerging technology and innovation team or program covers everything from AI to quantum to semiconductors to space tech to gaming to photonics. And we work with companies that are developing these technologies and applying them kind of on the ground, so to speak. But we also have that national strategic picture. So when we speak to DSIT or a minister or whatever else, we can speak to the full range of technologies that the UK, we believe, should be leading on. And I think the really interesting thing we're doing at the moment, and we kicked this off about 6 months ago, is basically joining them all up. And so through our technology convergence activity, which is kind of year-long initiative that we're about halfway through, we are essentially exploring opportunities at the intersections of these technologies. So if you think 20 years ahead, 10 years ahead, the more than likely the next big I don't know, the world's leading quantum company will not be a purely quantum company. It will probably be quantum plus AI, or the UK's next big robotics company will be an AI robotics company. And so what is the intersection? How are these technologies intersecting? And then where are the points at which UK businesses and the UK as a whole can lead and can capture value? And so that's what we're teasing out through our kind of deep expertise and member relationships across all of these technologies. Most of which you could call deep tech, which is, I guess, a whole distinct bundle of technologies. But um, it's the really exciting thing is when they come together, and you've got the transformative potential of AI software combined with quantum computing, for instance. And a lot of people don't quite know what that will achieve and what use cases will come out of that. And that's why we bring the quantum company and the AI company into the room together and then see the magic kind of happen there and then.
Must be really cool to kind of watch those ideas that like unfold in real time. It's almost like that Spider-Man meme where it's like, hey, you do this.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think it's, really interesting conversation for me as well, where I often get dragged into UK and Europe as a wider ecosystem. So really be able to drill into us as like a nation and this little small island floating around. Like I think it's really cool to really delve into the impact, the changes we can make, and thinking about things differently on like the granular level of and the systems level thinking, and not just we're good at AI software, so let's just stick at those two things. It's no, we need to really be part of this wider ecosystem and this full robotics life cycle, not just a little part of the stack. um and I think it was a great read, but for everyone listening, please check out the Tech UK report for seizing the robotics opportunity. I'm sure Rory's more than happy to send copies if anyone needs. And yeah, again, Rory, thank you so much for joining today. I love your insights, and I love how you think and talk about the future of change and the workforce and the economic situation in this industry as well. I think it's like a really useful framing of where we're at today, and specifically what needs to happen next. Like what steps do we need to take from education through to adoption and investments, and yeah, how we're going to basically become future leaders in deploying robots at scale, or whether it's the sector of which is going to be our specialism and we are known for. But yeah, there any closing points you'd like to make? Anything I could have, yeah, haven't thrown in front of you today?
God, I don't think so. I think this has been quite a comprehensive and really interesting conversation. Just to say it one more time, the opportunity is absolutely massive for tangible increases in everyone's quality of life in the UK. We're developing these technologies already, and we need to double, triple down on deploying them and seeing the benefit. So if any of that interests you, then please do reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, but techUK website as well. Follow what we get up to, and let's seize the opportunity.
Yeah, definitely not an opportunity to miss. And look there, thank you so much for being an awesome guest, and thank you everyone for listening to the BotPod. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.